Chapter 11. The Hunting of the Man. It came before my mind with an unreasonable hope of escape that the outer door of my room was still open to me. I was convinced now, absolutely assured, that Moreau had been viviscating a human being. All the time since I had heard this name, I had been trying to link my mind in some way the grotesque animalism of the islanders with his abominations, and now I thought I saw it all. The memory of his work and the transfusion of blood recurred to me. The creatures I had seen were victims of some hideous experiment. These sickening scoundrels had merely intended to keep me back, to fool me their display of confidence. I presently fall upon me a fate of more horrible than death, with torture after torture, the most hideous degradation of as is possible to conceive, to send me off a lost soul, a beast, to the rest of the calmest route. I looked round for some weapon. Nothing. Then, in inspiration, I turned over the deck chair and put my foot aside it, and tore away the side rail. It happened that a nail came away from the wood, and projecting gave a touch of danger to an otherwise petty weapon. I heard a step outside, and incontinently flung open the door and found Montgomery within a yard of it. He meant to lock the outer door. I raised a nail and stick of mine and cut his face. He sprang back, and I hesitated for a moment, and turned and fled around the corner of the house. "Prendrick, man!" I heard astonished cry. "Don't be a silly ass, man!" Another minute, I thought, and he would have had me locked in, and as ready as a hospital rabbit for my fate. He emerged behind the corner, for I heard him shout, "Prendrick!" Then he began to run after me, shouting things as he ran, this time running blindly. I went northeastward in the direction right angles to my previous expedition. Once, as I was running headlong to the beach, I glanced over my shoulder and saw his attendant with him. I ran furiously up the slope, over it, then turning eastward along a rocky valley fringed on the either side of the jungle. I ran for perhaps a mile, another, after my chest straining, my heart beating in my ears, and then hearing nothing of Montgomery or this man, the feeling upon the verge of exhaustion, I doubled sharply back towards the beach, and as I judged, and I lay down the shelter of canebrake. I remained there for a long time, too fearful to move, and indeed too fearful to plan even a course of action. A wild scene about me lay sleeping silently under the sun, and only sound near me was a thin hum of small gnats that had discovered me. I presently became aware of a drowsy breathing sound, and soughing of the sea upon the beach. After about an hour, I heard Montgomery shouting my name, far away to the north, that had set me thinking of my plan of action. As I interpreted it then, this island was inhabited by these only two vivisectors, and the animalized victims. Some of these, no doubt, could press in their service against me if I need arose. I knew both Moreau and Montgomery carried revolvers, and, save for a feeble bar of deal spike with a small nail and merest mockery of a mace, I was unarmed. So lay it still there until I began to think about food and drink, and then I thought the real hopelessness of my position came home to me. I knew no way of getting anything to eat. I was too ignorant of botany or to discover or any resort or of fruit that might lie about me. I had no means of trapping the few rabbits upon the island. It grew blanker the more I turned the prospect over. At last, the desperation of my position, my mind turned the animal men I had encountered. I tried to find some hope in what I remembered to them. In turn, I recalled each one I had seen, and turned to draw some augury as assistance from my memory. Then suddenly I heard a staghound bay, and then realized a new danger. I took a little time to think, or they would have caught me then, but snatching up my nailed stick, rushed headlong from my hiding place toward the sound of the sea. I remember a growth of thorny plants, and with spines of stabbed like penknives. I emerged bleeding, with a torn clothes upon the lip of a long creek opening northward. I went straight out into the water for without a minute's hesitation, and wading up the creek, I presently finding myself knee-deep in a little stream. I scrambled at last out the westward bank, and with my heart beating loudly in my ears, crept into tangle of ferns to await the issue. I heard the dog, there was only one, draw nearer, and yelp when it came to the thorns. Then I heard no more, and presently began to think I had escaped. The minutes passed, the silence lengthened out, and at last, after an hour of security, my courage began to return to me. By this time I was no longer very much terrified of very miserable. I had, as it were, passed the limit of terror and despair. I felt now that my life was practically lost, and the persuasion made me capable of daring anything. I had even a certain wish to encounter Moreau face to face, as I had waded into the water. I remembered that if I were too hard pressed to at least one path to escape from the torment still lay open to me, they could not very well prevent my drowning myself. I had half a mind to drown myself then, but an odd wish to see a whole adventure out, a queer, impersonal spectacle interest in myself, restrained me. I stretched my limbs, sore and painful from the pricks of the spiny plants, and stared round me at the trees, and so suddenly that they seemed to jump to the green tracery about it. My eyes lit upon the black face watching me. I saw it was a simian creature who had met the launch upon the beach. He was clinging to the oblique stem of the palm tree. I had gripped my stick and stood up facing him. He began chattering. You, was all I could distinguish at first. Suddenly he dropped from the tree, and in another moment he was holding the fronds apart and staring curiously at me. I did not feel the same repugnance toward this creature which I had experienced in my encounters with the other beast-men. You, he said in the boat. He was a man, at least as much of a man as Montgomery's attendant, for he could talk. Yes, I said, I came in the boat from the ship. Oh, he said, and his bright eyes, restless eyes, traveled over me, to my hands, to the stick I carried, to my feet, to the tattered places in my coat, the cuts, scratches I received from the thorns. Seemed puzzled at something. His eyes came back to my hands and held his own hand out and counted his digits slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Eh? I did not grasp the meaning then, and afterwards I was to find a great portion of these beast people had malformed hands, lacking sometimes even 3 digits. But guessing this was in some way greeting, I did not the same thing by the way of reply. He had grinned and with immense satisfaction. Then his swift roving glance went around again. He made a swift movement and then vanished. The fern fronds had stood between and came swishing together. I pushed out the brake after him, and astonished to find him swinging cheerfully by one lank arm from a rope of creepers that looped down from the foliage overhead. His back was to me. "Hello," I said. He came down in a twisting jump and stood facing me. I said, "where can I get something to eat?" "Eat," he said. "Eat man's food now." And his eye went back to swing of ropes. "At the huts." "But where are the huts?" "Ooh, I'm new, you know." At that he swung around and set off a quick walk. All his motions were curiously rapid. "Come along," he said. I went with him to see adventure out. I guess the huts were some rough shelter where he had some more of these beast people lived. I might have perhaps find them friendly, to find them some handle of mines to take hold of. I did not know how far they had forgotten their human heritage. My ape-like companion trotted along my side, with his hands hanging down from his jaw thrust forward. I wondered what memory he might have of him. "How long have you been on this island?" I said. "How long?" he asked, and after having the question repeated, he held up 3 fingers. The creature was a little better than an idiot. He tried to make out what that he meant by that, and it seemed I bored him. After another question or two, he suddenly left my side and went leaping at some fruit that hung from a tree. He pulled down a handful of prickly husk and went eating the contents. I noticed this with satisfaction, for here at least there was a hint of feeding. I tried with him other questions, but this chattering, prompt responses were as often as not quite at cross purposes with my questions. Some few were appropriate, others were quite parrot-like. I was so intent upon these peculiarities that I scarcely noticed the path we followed. Presently we came to trees, all charred and brown, and bare place covered with yellow, white incrustation, across which drifting smoke, pungent and with whiffs to nose and eyes, went drifting. On our right, over a shoulder of bare rock, I saw a level blue of the sea. A path coiled down abruptly into the narrow ravine between two tumbled and knotty masses of blackish scoriae. Into this we plunged. It was extremely dark. This passage, after the blinding sunlight, reflected the sulphurous ground. Its walls grew steep and approached each other. Blotches of green and crimson drifted across my eyes. My conductor stopped suddenly. "Home," he said. I stood on the floor of the chasm that the first was absolutely dark to me. I heard some strange noises and thrust the knuckles of my left hand into my eyes. I became aware of the disagreeable odor, like that of a monkey's cage ill-cleaned. Beyond, the rock opened again upon a gradual slope of sunlit greenery. On either hand, the light smote down through the narrow ways into the central gloom. Chapter 12. Sayers of the Law. Then something cold touched my hand. I started violently. Then close to me a dim pinkish thing, looking more like a flayed child than anything else in the world. The creature had exactly the mild but repulsive features of a sloth, but the same low forehead, slow gestures. As the first shock of the change of light passed, I saw about me more distinctly. The little sloth-like creature was standing and staring at me. My conductor had vanished. The place was narrow passage between high walls of lava, a crack in the knotted rock on either side, interwoven heaps of sea mat, palm fans, and reeds leaning against the rock formed the rough and impenetrably dark dens. Winding way up the ravine between these, scarcely 3 yards wide, and was disfigured by lumps of decaying fruit pulp and other refuse, which accounted for the disagreeable stench of the place. The little pink sloth creature was still blinking at me when my 8 men appeared at the aperture of the nearest of these dens, and beckoned me in. As he did so, a slouching monster wriggled out from one of the places further up this strange street and stood up in featureless silhouette against the bright green beyond. Staring at me, I hesitated, having half a mind to bolt the way, and I had come, and then, determined to go through with the adventure, I wrapped my nailed stick about the middle and crawled into the little evil-smelling lean-to after my conductor. It was a semicircular space, shaped like a half of a beehive, and against the rocky wall that formed the inner side of it was a pile of variegated fruits, coconuts, among other things. Some rough vessels of lava and wood stood about the floor, and one on a rough stool. There was no fire. In the darkest corner of the hut sat a shapeless mass of darkness that grunted, "Hey!" as I came in, and my 8-man stood in the dim light of the doorway and held out a split coconut to me as I crawled into another corner and squatted down. I took it and began gnawing on it as serenely as possible, in spite of a certain trepidation and nearly intolerable closeness of the den. The little pink sloth creature stood in the aperture of the hut, and something else with a drab face and bright eyes came staring over its shoulder. "Hey!" came the lump of mystery opposite. "It's a man! It's a man!" grabbed my conductor. "A man! A man! A high-five man! Like me!" "Shut up!" said the voice from the dark and grunted. I gnawed my coconut amid the impressive stillness. I peered hard into the blackness, but could distinguish nothing. It is a man, a voice repeated. He comes to live with us? It was a thick voice, with something in it, a kind of whistling overtone, that struck me as peculiar, but the English accent was strangely good. The ape-man looked at me as though he expected something. I perceived the pause was interrogative. He comes to live with you, I said. It is a man. He must learn the law. I began to distinguish now a deeper blackness in the black, the vague outline of a haunched figure. Then I noticed the opening of the place, that darkness, two more black heads. My hand tightened on my stick. The thing in the repeated in a louder tone, say the words. I had missed its remark. Not to go on all fours. That is the law. It is repeated in a kind of sing-song. I was puzzled. Say the words, said the ape-man, repeating at the figures in the doorway echoed. With this, a treat in tone of their voices. I realized that I had to repeat this idiotic formula, and then I began the insanest ceremony. The voice in the dark began intoning mad litany, line by line, and one the rest to repeat it. As they did so, they swayed from side to side in the oddest way, and beat the hands upon their knees. I followed their example. I could have imagined that I was already dead in another world. That dark hut, these grotesque, dim figures, just freckled here by the glimmer of light, and all of them swaying in unison and chanting. Not go on all fours, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to suck up drink, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to eat fish or flesh, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to claw the bark of trees, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to chase other men, that is the law. Are we not men? And so from the prohibition, these acts of folly, to the prohibition of what I thought were the maddest and most impossible, the most indecent things I could well imagine. A kind of rhythmic fever fell on all of us. We gabbled and swayed faster and faster, repeating this amazing law. Superficially, the contagion of these broods was upon me. The deep down within me, the laughter and the disgust struggled together. We ran through a long list of prohibitions, and the chant swung round a new formula. His is the house of pain. His is the house of the hand of pain. His is the hand that wounds. His is the hand that heals. And so on for another long series, most quite incomprehensible gibberish to me about him, whoever he might be. I could have fancied it was a dream, but never before had I heard chanting in a dream. His is the lightning flash, we sang. His is the deep, salt sea. A horrible fancy came into my head that Moreau, after animalizing these men, had infected their dwarfed brains of some kind of definition of himself. However, I was too keenly aware of the white teeth and strong claws about me to stop my chanting on that account. His are the stars in the sky. At last the song ended. I saw the ape-man's face shining with perspiration, and my eyes, now accustomed to the darkness, I saw more distinctly the figure in the corner of which the voice came. It was the size of a man, but it seemed to be covered with a dull gray hair, almost like a Skye terrier. What was it? What were they all? Imagine yourself surrounded by the most horrible cripples and maniacs it is possible to conceive, that you may understand a little feeling of my feelings with these grotesque caricatures of my humanity about me. He is a five-man, like me, said the ape-man. I held out my hands. The gray creature in the corner leant forward. not to run on all fours. That is the law. Are we not men? He put out a strangely distorted talon and gripped my fingers. The thing was almost like a hoof of a deer produced into my claws. I could have yelled with surprise and pain. His face came forward and peered at my nails, and came forward into the light of the opening of the hut, and I saw with a quivering disgust that it was like the face of neither men nor beasts, but a mere shock of gray hair, with three shadowy overarchings to mark the eyes and mouth. He has little nails, said the grisly creature in his hairy beard. It is well. He threw my hand down, and instinctively I gripped my stick. I eat roots and herbs. It is his will, said the ape-man. I am the sayer of the law, said the great figure. Here come all that be new to learn the law. I sit in the darkness and say the law. It is even so, said one of the beasts in the doorway. Evil are the punishments of those who break the law. None escape. None escape, said the beast folk, glancing furtively at one another. None, said the ape-man. None escape. See, I did a little thing, a wrong thing, once. I jabbered, stopped talking. None could understand. I am burnt, branded in the hand. He is great. He is good. None escape, said the gray creature in the corner. None escape, said the beast people, looking askance and at one another. For every one want that is bad, said the gray sayer of the law. What will want we not do? We shall know. Some want to follow things that move, to watch and slink and spring, and to kill and bite, deep and rich and sucking blood. That it is bad not to chase the other men. That is the law. Are we not men? Not to eat flesh or fish. That is the law. Are we not men? None escape, said an appled brute standing in the doorway. For every one of the want is bad, said the gray sayer of the law. Some want to go tearing with teeth and hands into the roots of things, snuffing into the earth. It is bad. None escape, said the men in the door. Some go clawing trees. Some go scratching at the graves of the dead. Some go fighting with the foreheads of feet or claws. Some bite suddenly, none giving occasion. Some love uncleanliness. None escape, said the ape-man, scratching his cough. None escape, said the little pink sloth creature. Punishment is sharp and sure. Therefore learn the law. Say the words. And incoherently he began again the strange litany of the law. And again these creatures began singing and swaying. My head reeled with this jabbering and close stretch out of the place, but I kept on, trusting to find presently some chance of new development. Not go on all fours. That is the law. Are we not men? We were making such a noise that I noticed something of a tumult outside, until someone, who I think was one of the two swine men I had seen, thrust his head over the little pink sloth creature and shouted something excitedly, something that I did not catch. Incoherently, as those at the openings of the hut vanished. My ape-man rushed out. The thing that had sat in the dark followed him. I only observed that it was big and clumsy and covered with silvery hair, and I was left alone. Then, before I reached the aperture, I heard a yelp of a staghound. For a moment, I stood horror-struck. I turned and saw the passage behind me blocked by another heavy brute, with a huge gray face and twinkling eyes advancing towards me. I looked and saw the right of me and a half a dozen yards in the front of the narrow gap, and the wall of a rock through which a ray of light slanted into the shadows. "Stop!" cried Moreau as I strode towards this, and then, "Hold him!" At that, first one face turned towards me, and then the others. Their bestial minds were happily slow. I dashed my shoulder into a clumsy monster who was turning to see what Moreau meant, and flung him forward into another. I felt his hands fly round, clutching at me and missing me. The little pink sloth creature dashed at me. I gashed down at its ugly face with the nail in my stick, and another minute was scrambling up the steep side pathway. The side kind of sloping chimney out of the ravine. I heard the howl behind me, the cries of "Catch him! Hold him!" The gray-faced creature appeared behind me and jammed a huge bulk into my cleft. "Go on! Go on!" they howled. I clambered up the narrow cleft of the rock and came out of the sulphur on the westward side of the village of the Beastmen. That gap was altogether fortunate for me, for the narrow chimney slanting obliquely upward must have impeded on the nearer pursuers. I ran over these white space down a steep slope. Through a scattered growth of trees, I came to a low-lying stretch of tall reeds, through which I pushed into rock, thick undergrowth that had been black and succulent underfoot. As I plunged into the reeds, my foremost emerged the gap. I broke my way through the undergrowth in minutes. The air behind me and about me was soon full of threatening cries. I heard the tumult of pursuers into the gap of the slope, and then crashing of the reeds, and now and then I hear the crackling crash of a branch. Some of the creatures roared like excited beasts of prey. A staghound yelped to the left. I heard Moreau and Montgomery shouting in the same direction. I turned sharply to the right. It seemed to me that even I heard Montgomery shouting for me to run for my life. Presently the ground gave rich and oozy under my feet, but I was desperate and went headlong into it. I struggled through knee-deep and came to a winding path among tall canes. The noise of my pursuers passed away to my left. In one place, 3 strange, pink, hopping animals, about the size of cats, bolted before my footsteps. This pathway ran up the hill, across another open space covered with white incrustation, and plunged into a cane break again, and suddenly turned parallel with the edge of the steep wall gap, which came without warning, like the ha-ha of an English park, turned with an unexpected abruptness. I was still running with all my might, and I never saw a drop until I was flying headlong through the air. I fell on my forearms and my head. Among thorns, I rose with a torn ear and bleeding face. I had fallen into a perpetuous ravine, rocky and thorny, full of hazy mist which drifted about me in wisp, and with a narrow streamlet from which this mist came meandering down the center. I was astonished at this thin fog full of blaze of daylight, but I had no time to stand wandering then. I turned to my right, downstream, hoping to come to see that direction, so I have had my way open to drown myself. It was only later that I found that I had dropped my nail stick into the fall. Presently, the ravine grew narrower for a space, and carelessly stepped into the stream. I jumped out again pretty quickly, for the water was almost boiling. I noticed, too, that there were thin sulphurous scum drifting upon its coiling water. Almost immediately came a turn of the ravine, and the indistinct blue horizon. A nearer sea was flashing of the sun of the myriad facets. I saw my death before me, but I was hot and panting, with the warm blood oozing out of my face and running pleasantly through my veins. I felt more in touch of exultation, too, having distanced my pursuers. It was not in me then to go out and drown myself yet. I stared back in the way I had come. I listened, save for a hum of the gnats and the chirp of some small insects that hopped among the thorns. The air was absolutely still. Then came the yelp of a dog, very faint, and chattering and gibbering, a snap of a whip and voices. They grew louder and fainter again. The noise receded up the stream and faded away. For a while the chase was over, but I knew now that how much hope of help for me lay in the beast people. Chapter 13. A Parley. I turned again and went down towards the sea. I found a red-hot stream broadened out to a shallow, weedy sand in which an abundance of crabs, long-bodied, many-legged creatures started from my footfall. I walked to the very edge of the salt water and felt I was safe. I turned and stared in the arms of akimbo, at the thick green behind me, into which the streamy ravine cut like a smoking gash. But, as I say, I was too full of excitement, and, a true saying, though those who have never known danger may doubt it, too desperate to die. Then it came into my head that there was only one chance before me yet. While Moreau and Montgomery and their bestial rabble chased me through the island, might I not go round the beach until I came to their enclosure, make a flank march upon them, in fact, and then with a rock lugged out of their loosely built wall, perhaps smash the lock of the smaller door and see what I could find, a knife, pistol, or whatnot, to fight with them with when they returned? It was at any rate something to try. So I turned the westward and walked along the water's edge, and setting sun flashed his blinding heat into my eyes. The slight of the Pacific tide was running in a gentle ripple. Presently the shore fell away southward, and the sun came round upon my right hand, and suddenly, far from in front of me, I saw first one, then several figures emerging from the bushes. Moreau with his gray staghound, and then Montgomery and two others. At that I stopped. They saw me, and began gesticulating and advancing. I stood watching them approach. The two beastmen came running toward me to cut off the undergrowth. Inland, Montgomery came, running also, but straight towards me. Moreau followed slower with the dog. At last I roused myself from inaction, and turning seaward, walked straight to the water. The water was very shallow at first. I was 30 yards out before the waves reached to my waist. Dimly I could see the interdial creatures darting away from my feet. "What are you doing, man?" cried Montgomery. I turned, standing waist deep, and stared at them. Montgomery stood panting at the margin of the water. His face was bright red with exertion, his long flaxen hair blown out of his head, and his dropping nether lip showed his irregular teeth. Moreau was just coming up, his frail pace firm, and the dog at his hand barked at me. Both of the men had heavy whips. Farther the beach stared at the beastmen. "What am I doing? I'm going to drown myself," I said. Montgomery and Moreau looked at each other. "Why?" asked Moreau. "Because that is better than being tortured by you." "I told you so," said Montgomery, and Moreau said something in a low tone. "What makes you think I shall torture you?" asked Moreau. What I saw," I said, "and those yonder—" "Hush," Moreau said, and held up his hand. "I will not," I said. "There were men. What were they now? At least I will not be like them." I looked past my interlocutors. Up beach were Montgomery's attendant, and one of the white-swathed brutes from the boat. Farther up the shadowed trees, I saw a little ape-man behind them, other dim figures. "Who are these creatures?" I said, pointing to them and raising my voice more and more I might reach them. "They were men like yourselves, whom have been infected with some bestial taint, men whom you have enslaved, and whom you still fear." You who listen," I cried, pointing now to Moreau, shouting past him and to the beastmen. "You who listen, do you not see these men still fear you, go in dread of you? Why then do you fear them? You are many." "For God's sake," cried Montgomery, "stop that, Prendrick!" "Prendrick!" cried Moreau. They both shouted together, as if to drown my voice, and behind them lowered the staring faces of the beastmen, wandering, their deformed hands hanging down the shoulders hunched up. They seemed, as I fancied, to be trying to understand me, to remember. I thought something of their human past. I went on shouting, scarcely remember what, that Moreau and Montgomery could be killed, that they were not to be feared. That was the burden of what I put into the heads of these beast people. I saw the green-eyed man in the dark rags, who had met me on the evening of my arrival, come out from among the trees, and others followed him, to hear me better. At last I want for my breath to be paused. Listen to me for a moment, I said in the steady voice of Moreau, and say that you will. Well, I said. I coughed, thought, and shouted. Latin, Pendrick! Said, bad Latin, schoolboy Latin, but try to understand. He non sunt homines, sunt amalia quae nos habeas vivisected. A humanizing process. I will explain. Come ashore. I laughed. A pretty story, I said. They build houses. They were men. It's likely you'll come ashore. The water that just beyond where you stand is deep and full of sharks. That's my way, I said, short and sharp. Presently, wait a minute, he took something out of his pocket and that flashed back the sun and dropped the object at his feet. That's a loaded revolver, he said. Montgomery will do the same. Here we'll do the same. We are going up the beach until you are satisfied with the distance is safe. You come again and take the revolvers. Not I. You have been third between you. I want you to think over things. The Pendrick, in the first place, I never asked you to come upon this island. If we vivisected men, we should import men, not beasts. In the next, we had you drugged last night. We wanted you to work you any mischief, and in the next, your first panic is over and you can think a little. Montgomery is quite up to the character you give him. We have chased you for your good, because these islanders is full of inimical phenomena. Besides, what should we want to shoot you when you have just offered to drown yourself? Why did you set your people onto me when I was in the hut? We felt sure of catching you and bringing you out of danger. Afterwards, we drew attention away from your scent for your good. I mused. It seemed just possible. Then I remembered something again. But I said, in the enclosure. That was the puma. Look here, Pendrick, said Montgomery. You're a silly ass. Come out of the water and take these revolvers and talk. We can't do anything more than we could do now. I will confess then and indeed always, I distrusted and dreaded Moreau, but Montgomery was a man I felt I understood. Go up to this beach, I said, and thinking, and added, holding your hands up. Can't do that, said Montgomery with an explanatory nod over his shoulder. Undignified. Go up the trees then, I said, as you please. It's a damned silly ceremony, said Montgomery. Both turned and faced the 6 or 7 grotesque creatures who stood in the sunlight, solid, casting shadows, moving, and yet so incredibly unreal. Montgomery cracked his whip at them, and forthwith they all turned and fled helter-skelter into the trees. And when Montgomery and Moreau were at a distance I judged sufficient, I waded ashore and picked up and examined the revolvers. To satisfy myself against the subtlest trickery, I discharged one and rounded lump of lava, and the satisfaction of seeing the stone pulverized at the beach splashed in the lead. I still hesitated for a moment. I'll take the risk, I said at last. With the revolver in each hand, I walked up to the beach towards them. That's better, said Moreau without affection. As it is, you have wasted the best part of my day with your confounded imagination. and with a touch contempt which humiliated me and Montgomery turned and went in silence before me. The knot of beast men, still wandering, stood back in the trees, and I passed them as serenely as possible. One started to follow me, but retreated again when Montgomery cracked his whip, and rest stood silent, watching. They once have been animals, but I never before saw an animal trying to think. Chapter 14. Dr. Moreau explains. "And now, Prendrick, I will explain," said Dr. Moreau, so soon as we had eaten and drunk. "I must confess that you are the most dictatorial guest I have ever entertained. I warn you that this is at last I shall do to oblige you. The next thing you threaten to commit suicide about, I shan't do, even at some personal inconvenience." He sat at the deck of my deck chair, a cigar half consumed in his white, dexterous-looking fingers. The light of the swinging lamp fell on his white hair. He stared through the little window at the starlight. I sat as far away from him as possible, and the table between us had and the revolvers into the hand. Montgomery was not present. I did not care to be with him to them in such a little room. "You admit that the vivisected human being, as you call it, is, after all, only the puma," said Moreau. He had made me visit that horror in the inner room to assure you myself of its inhumanity. "It is the puma," I said, "still alive, but cut so and mutilated, as I pray I may never see living flesh again. Of all vile—" "Never mind that," said Moreau. "At least spare me those youthful horrors. Montgomery used to be just the same. You admit that is the puma. Now be quiet while I reel off my physiological lecture to you." And forthwith, beginning the tone of a man supremely bored, but presently warming a little, he explained his work to me. And he was very simple and convincing, now that there was a touch of sarcasm in his voice. Presently I found myself hot and with shame and mutual positions. The creatures I had seen were not men, had never been men. They were animals, humanized animals, triumphs of vivisection. You forgot that a skilled vivisector can do to living things, said Moreau. "For my own part, I'm puzzled why the things I have done here have not been done before. Small efforts, of course, have been made. Amputation, tongue-cutting, excisions. Of course, you know, by a squint may be induced or cured of surgery. Then, in the case of excisions, you have all kinds of secondary changes, pigmentary disturbances, modifications of passions, alterations in the secretion of fatty tissue. I have no doubt that you have heard these things." "Of course," I said, "but these foul creatures of yours—" "All in good time," he said, waving his hand at me. "I am only beginning. Those are trivial cases of alteration. Surgery can do it better things than that. There is building up as well as breaking down and changing. You have heard, perhaps, of a common surgical operation resorted in the cases of where the nose has been destroyed, a flap of skin that is cut from the forehead, turned down on the nose, and heals in a new position. This is the kind of grafting in a new position in the part of an animal upon itself. Grafting the freshly obtained material from another material is also possible. The case of teeth, for example. The grafting of skin and bone is done to facilitate the healing, and the surgeon places the middle of the wound pieces of skin snipped from another animal and fragments of bone from victim freshly killed. Hunter's cockspur, possibly you have heard of that, flourished on the bull's neck, and the rhinoceros rat of Algerian Vaouavez, and are also thought of. Monsters manufactured by transferring a slip of tail an ordinary rat on its snout and allowing to heal in that position. Monsters manufactured, I said. Then you mean to tell me, yes, these creatures that you have seen are animals carbon and wrought into new shapes. To the study of plastically living forms, my life has been devoted. I have studied for years, gaining in knowledge as I go. I see you look horrified, and yet I am telling you nothing new. It all lay in the surface of practical anatomy years ago, but no one had the temerity to touch it. It is not simply the outward form of an animal I can change. The physiology, the chemical rhythm of the creature may be made to undergo an enduring modification, of which vaccination and other methods of inculcation of other living or dead matter are examples that, no doubt, will be familiar to you. A similar operation is transfusion of blood, with which subject, indeed, I began. These are all familiar cases, less so and probably far more extensive, where the operations of those medieval practitioners who made dwarves and beggar cripples, show monsters, some vestiges of whose art still remain a preliminary manipulation of young mountebank contortionists. Victor Hugo gives an amount of them in L'Homme qui rit, but perhaps meaning grows plain now. You begin to see that it is all possible thing to transplant tissue from one part of an animal to another, or from one animal to another, and to alter chemical reactions and methods of growth, to modify articulations of its limbs, and indeed to change the most intimate structure. And yes, this extraordinary branch of knowledge has never been sought as an end, and systematically by modern investigators will look up to it. Some such things have been hit upon the last resort of surgery. Most of the kindred evidence that will recur in your mind have been demonstrated as you were by accident, by tyrants, by criminals, by breeders of horses and dogs, by all kinds of untrained, clumsy-handed men working for their own immediate ends. I was the first man to take up this question, armed with antiseptic surgery and really scientific knowledge of laws and growth. Yet one would imagine it must have been practiced in secret before. Such creatures as Siamese twins and the vaults of Inquisition, no doubt their chief aim was artistic torture, but some at least of the inquisitors must have had touched in scientific curiosity. But, I said, these animals talk. He said that was so, and proceeded to point out the possibility of vivisection does not stop at the mere physical metamorphosis. A pig may be educated. The mental structure is even less determined by the bodily than the bodily. In our growing science of hypnotism, we find the promise of possibility surpassing the old inherent instincts by new suggestions, grafting upon or replacing the inherited fixed ideas, very much indeed what we call moral education, he said. In such artificial modification, the perversion of instinct, pugnancy, is trained into courageous self-sacrifice, and surplus sexuality into religious emotion, and the great difference between man and monkey is the larynx, he continued, in the incapacity framed to delicately different sound symbols by which thought can be sustained. In this I failed to agree with him, but with a certain incivility he declined to notice my objection. He repeated that this thing was so, and continued to account his work. I asked him why he had taken the human form as a model. There seemed to me then, there still seems to me now, a strange wickedness for that choice. He confessed that he had chosen that form by chance. I might just have worked on to form sheep into llamas and llamas into sheep. I suppose that there is something in human form that appeals to the artistic turn of mind more powerfully than any animal shape can. But I've not confined myself to man-making. Once or twice, he was silent, for a minute perhaps. 3 years! How could they have slipped by? And here I have wasted a day of saving your life, and now I am wasting an hour explaining myself. But I said, I still do not understand. Where is your justification for inflicting all this pain? The only thing that could excuse vivisection to me would be some application. Precisely, he said. But you see, I am differently constituted. Here we are on different platforms. You are a materialist. I am not a materialist, I began hotly. In my view, for it is just this question of pain that parts us. So long as visible or audible pain turns you sick, so long as your own pains drive you, so long as the pain underlies the propositions about sin, so long, I tell you, you are an animal, thinking a little less obscurely of animal feats. This pain, I give an impatient shrug of sophistry. Oh, but such a little thing! Mind truly open what a science has must see that is a little thing. It may save you in this little planet, this speck of cosmic dust, invisible long before the nearest star could be attained. It may be, I say, that nowhere else does this called pain occur, but the laws we feel our way towards, why, even on this earth, even among living things, what pain is there? As he spoke, he drew a little knife from his pocket, opened the smaller blade, and moved his chair so that I could see his thigh. Then, choosing a place deliberately, he drove the blade into his leg and withdrew it. No doubt, he said, you have seen that before. It does not hurt a pinprick, but what does it show? The capacity of pain is not needed in a muscle, and it is not placed there. It is but a little needed in the skin, and only here and there over the thigh is a spot capable of feeling pain. Pain is simply our eccentric medical advisor to warn us and stimulate us. Not all living flesh is painful, nor is nerve. Not even all sensory nerve. There is no taint of pain, real pain, and sensations of optic nerve, and you wound the optic nerve. You merely see flashes of light, just as disease of auditory nerve merely means a humming in our ears. Plants do not feel, nor do lower animals. It's possible that such animals such as the starfish and crayfish do not feel pain at all. Then with men, the more intelligent they become, the more intelligently they will see after their own welfare, and the less they will need to goad about to keep them out of danger. I never heard of a useless thing that was not ground out of existence by evolution sooner or later. Did you? And pain gets needless. I am then I am a religious man, Prendrick, as every sane man must be. It may be, I fancy, that I have not seen more of the ways of this world's maker than you, for I have sought his laws, and in my way, all my life, while you, I understand, have been collecting butterflies. And I tell you, pleasure and pain have nothing to do with heaven or hell. Pleasure and pain, bah! What is your theologist's ecstasy but Mahomet's houri and dark? This store which men and women set on pleasure and pain, Prendrick, is the mark of the beast upon them, the mark of the beast which they came. Pain, and pleasure, they are for us only so long to wriggle in the dust. You see, I went on search just as they led me. That is the only way I have ever true research going. I asked the question, devised the method obtaining the answer, and the fresh question was the possible or impossible. You cannot imagine what this means to an investigator, what an intellectual passion grows upon him. You cannot imagine the strange, colorless delight of these intellectual desires. The thing before you is no longer an animal, a fellow creature, but a problem, sympathetic pain. All I know of it is I remember as a thing I used to suffer from years ago. I wanted it as one thing I wanted, to find out extreme limit of plasticity in a living life. But I said, the thing is an abomination. To this day, I have never troubled about the ethics of the matter, he continued. The study of nature makes a man at last the remorseless of nature. I have gone on, not heeding anything but the question I was pursuing. The material has dripped into the huts of yonder. It was nearly 11 years since we came here. I and Montgomery and 6 Kanakas remember the still greenness of the island, of the open, empty ocean for us, as though it was yesterday. This place seemed waiting for me. The stores were landed and house was built. The Kanakas founded some huts near the ravine. I went to work here upon what I had brought with me. There were some disagreeable things that happened at first. I began with a sheep and killed it after a day and a half by the slip of the scalpel. But it took another sheep and made another thing of pain and fear and left it bound up to heal. It looked quite human to me when I finished it, but when I had went into it and I was discontented with it, it remembered me, and I was beyond terrified to imagination, and it had no more the wits of a sheep. The more I looked at it, the more clumsier it seemed, until at last I put the monster out of its misery. These animals without courage, these fear-haunted, pain-driven things without a spark of pugnacious energy to face torment, they are no good for man-making. Then I took a gorilla I had, and upon that, working with an infinite care and mastering difficulty after difficulty, I made my first man. All the week, all night and day, I molded him. With him, chiefly the brain and molding, much had to be added, much changed. I thought him a fair specimen of negroid type and finished him, and lay bandaged, bound, and motionless before me. It was only when his life was assured that I left him and came into his room again, and found Montgomery as much as you are, and heard him some cries as thing grew human, cries like those that had disturbed you so, that I didn't take him completely into my confidence at first, and the Kanakas too had realized something of it, and they scared out their wits by the sight of me. I got Montgomery over to me in a way, but he had the hardest job to prevent the Kanakas deserting. Finally, they did, and so we lost the yacht. I spent many days educating the brute. Altogether, I had him for 3 or 4 months. I taught him the rudiments of English, gave him ideas of counting, even made a little thing read the alphabet, but that was slow, though I've met with idiots slower, and he began with a clean sheet. Mentally, had no memories left in his mind what he had been. When his scars were quite healed, he was no longer anything but painful and stiff, and able to converse a little. I took him yonder and introduced him to Kanakas, and as interesting as Stowaway. They were horribly afraid of him at first, somehow, which offended me rather, not for I was conceited about him, but his ways seemed so mild, and he was so abject, and after a time they received him and took his education in hand. He was quick to learn, very imitative and adaptive, and built himself a hovel rather better, and it seemed to me, than their own shanties. There was one among the boys of a missionary, and he taught the thing to read, or at least pick out the letters, and gave him some rudimentary ideas of morality, but it seems the beast's habits were not all but as desirable. I rested from work for some days after this, and was in a mind to write an account for the whole affair to make up English physiology. Then I came upon the creature squatting up the tree and gibbering at the two Kanakas who had been teasing him. I threatened him and told him the inhumanity of such proceeding aroused his sense of shame, and came home to resolve to do better before I could take my work back to England. I have been doing better, but somehow the things drift back again. The stubborn beast flesh grows day by day back again, but I mean to do better things still. I mean to conquer that. That is this puma. But that's the story. All the Kanaka boys are now dead. One fell overboard of the launch. One died of a wounded heel that he poisoned in some way with the plant juice. 3 went away in the yacht, and I hope we were drowned. The other one was killed. Well, I have replaced them. Montgomery went as much as you disposed to do at first. And then, what became of the other one? I said sharply. The other Kanaka who was killed. The fact is, after I had made a number of human creatures, I made a thing. He hesitated. Yes, I said. It was killed. I don't understand, I said. Do you mean to say it killed the Kanaka? Yes. It killed several other things that it caught. We chased it for a couple days and only got loose by accident. I never meant it to get away. It wasn't finished. It was purely an experiment. Though it was a limbless thing with a horrible face that writhed along the ground in a serpentine fashion. It was immensely strong and infuriating pain. It lurked in the woods for some days until we hunted it, and then wriggled into a northern part of the island, and we divided the party close upon it. Montgomery insisted upon coming with me, and the man had a rifle, and when his body was found, the barrels were curved in the shape of an S and nearly bitten through. Montgomery shot the thing. After that, I struck the ideal of humanity, except for the little things. He became silent, and I sat in silence watching his face. For 20 years altogether, counting 9 years in England, I have been going on. There is still something in everything I do that defeats me, makes me dissatisfied, challenges me to further efforts. Sometimes I rise above my level, sometimes I fall below it, but always I fall short of the things I dream. The human shape I can get now, almost with ease, so that the lithe and graceful or thick and strong, but often there is trouble with the hands and claws, painful things that I dare not shape too freely, but it is the subtle grafting and reshaping one must needs to the brain my trouble lies. The intelligence is oddly low, the unaccountable blank ends, unexpected gaps, the least satisfactory of it all, something I cannot touch, somewhere I cannot determine where, in the seat of my emotions, cravings, instincts, desires to harm humanity, a strange hidden reservoir to burst forth and suddenly induate the whole being of creature and anger, hate, or fear. These creatures of mine seemed strange and uncanny to you so soon as you began to observe them, but to me, just after I make them, they seem to be undisputably human beings. It's afterwards, as I observe them, that the persuasion fades. First one animal trait, then another, creeps to the surface and stares out at me. But I will conquer yet. Each time I dip a living creature into the bath of burning pain, I say, this time I will burn out all the animal. This time I will make a rational creature of my own. After all, what is 10 years? Men have been 100,000 in the making, he thought darkly. But I am drawing near fastness, this puma of mine. After a silence, and they revert, as soon as my hand is taken from the beast, begins to creep back, and begins to assert itself again. Another long silence. Then you will take the things that you make into those dens, I said. They go. I turn them out from when I began to feel the beast in them, and presently they wander there. They dread this house and me. There is a kind of travesty of humanity over there. Montgomery knows about it, for he interferes with their affairs. He has trained one or two of them in his service. He's been ashamed of it, but I believe he half likes some of the beasts. But it's his business, not mine. They only sicken me for a sense of failure. I take no interest in them. I fancy they follow in the lines of Kanaka missionary marked out. They have a kind of mockery in the rational life. Poor beasts! There's something they call the law. Sing hymns about all thine. They build themselves their dens, gather fruit, and pull herbs. Marry even, but I can see through it all, that they see into my very souls, that they are nothing but the souls of beasts that perish, anger, the lust, live, gratify themselves. Yet they're odd, complex, like everything else alive. There is a kind of upward striving in them, the part vanity, part waste sexual emotion, with part waste curiosity. It only mocks me. I have hope for this Puma. I have worked harder at her head or brain. And now, he said, standing up after a long gap of silence during which we had each pursued our own thoughts, what do you think? Do you still fear of me? I looked at him and still saw but a white-faced, white-haired man with calm eyes. Save for his serenity, a touch of almost beauty that resulted in set tranquility and his magnificent build, he might have passed muster among 100 other comfortable old gentlemen. Then I shivered. By the way of answer to his second question, I handed him a revolver and with either hand. "Keep them," he said, and snatched a yawn. He stood up, stared at me for a moment, and smiled. "You have 2 eventful days," he said. "I should advise some sleep. I am glad it's all clear. Good night." He thought me over for a moment. Then, when I went out by the inner door, I immediately turned the key in the outer one. I sat down again, and sat for some time in a kind of stagnant mood, so weary, emotionally, mentally, and physically, that I could not think beyond the point which had left me. The black window stared at me like an eye. Like the last of an effort, I put in the light, and I got into the hammock. Very soon, I was asleep. Chapter 15. Concerning the Beast Folk. I woke early. Moreau's explanation stood before my mind, clear and definite. From the moment of my awakening, I got out the hammock and went to the door to assure myself the key was turned. Then I turned at the window bar and found it firmly fixed. That these men-like creatures were in the truth of only bestial monsters, were grotesque travesties of men, filled me with vague uncertainty of their possibilities, which far worse than any definite fear. A tapping came at the door, and I heard a gluttonous accent of Maling speaking. I pocketed one of the revolvers, keeping it in one hand upon it, and opened it to him. "Good morning, sir," he said, bringing in addition to the customary herb breakfast, an ill-cooked rabbit. Montgomery followed him. His roving eye caught a position of my arm, which he smiled askew. The Puma was resting to heal that day, but Moreau, who was singularly solitary in his habits, did not join us. I talked with Montgomery to clear my ideas of the way in which the beast folk lived. In particular, I was urgent to know about how these inhuman monsters kept from falling upon Moreau and Montgomery from the rending of one another. He explained to me that the comparative safety of Moreau and himself was due to the limited mental scope of these monsters, and in spite of their increased intelligence and tendency of animal instincts to reawaken, they had certain fixed ideas implemented by Moreau in their minds, which was absolutely bounded by their imaginations. They were really hypnotized and had been told that certain things were impossible and that certain things were not done, and that these prohibitions were woven into the texture of minds beyond any possibility of disobedience or dispute. Certain matters, however, which in which old instinct was at war with Moreau's convenience, were in a less stable condition. A series of propositions called the law I had already heard and recited battled in their minds with a deep-seated, ever-rebellious cravings of their animal natures. This law were ever repeating, I found, and ever breaking. Both Montgomery and Moreau displayed particular solitude in to keep them ignorant of taste of blood. They feared that the inevitable suggestions of that flavor. Montgomery told me that the law, especially among the feline beast people, became oddly weakened about nightfall, and then the animal was at its strongest. And then that a spirit of adventure sprang up from them at the dusk, and when they dare say things that they would never dream about that day, to that I owed my stalking by the leopard man on the night of the arrival. But during these earlier days they broke my only furtively and after dark. In the daylight there was a general atmosphere of respect and multifarious prohibitions. And here perhaps I gave a few general facts about the island of the beast people. The island, which was of irregular outline and lay low upon the wide sea, had a total area, I suppose, of 7 or 8 square miles. It was volcanic in origin, and now fringed on 3 sides by the coral reefs, some fumaroles to the northward, and a hot spring. There were only vestiges of forces that had long since originated, and now the faint quiver of the earthquake would be sensible, and sometimes it sent the spire of smoke. It would be rendered tumultuous by gusts of steam, but that was all well. The population of the island, Montgomery informed me, now numbered rather more than 60 of these strange creations of Moreau's art. Now, not counting the smaller monstrosities which lived in the undergrowth, which were without human form. Altogether, they had made nearly 120. They had died, and others, like the writhing footless thing of which had told me, had come to by violent ends. And to answer my question, Montgomery had said that they actually bore offspring, but these generally died. When they lived, Moreau took them and stamped the human form upon them. There was no evidence of inheritance of their acquired human characteristics. The females were less numerous than males, and liable to much furtive persecution in spite of monogamy and the law enjoined. It would be impossible for me to describe these beast people in detail. My eye had no training in details, and unhappily I cannot sketch. Most striking, perhaps, in their general appearance is the disproportion between legs of the creatures and the length of their bodies, and yet so relative to the idea of grace. My eye became habituated to their forms. At last I even fell with their persuasion to my own long thighs were ungainly. Another point was forward carriage and the head of clumsy inhuman curvature of the spine. Even the ape-man lacked the inward sinuous curve of a back which makes the human figure so graceful. Most of the shoulders hunched clumsily, and their short forearms hung weakly at their sides. Few of them were conspicuously hairy, at least until the end of my time upon the island. The next most obvious deformity was their faces, almost all of which were prognathous, malformed about the ears, with large protuberant noses, very furry or bristly hair, and often strangely colored, strangely placed eyes. None could laugh, though the ape-man had a chattering titter. Beyond these general characters, their heads had little in common. Each preserved the quality of its particular species. The human mark distorted, but not to hide the leopard, the ox, or the sow. The other animals or animals from which the creature had been molded. Voices, too, varied exceedingly. The hands were always malformed, and though some surprised me by their unexpected human appearance, almost all were deficient in number of the digits, clumsy about the fingernails, and lacking any tactile sensibility. The two most formidable animal men were my leopard man and the creature made of hyena and swine. Larger than these were three bull creatures who pulled in a boat. Then came the silvery hairy man, who was also the sayer of the law, Mling, and the satyr-like creature of the ape and goat. There were three swine men and a swine woman, a mare rhinoceros creature, and several other females whose sources I did not ascertain. There were several wolf creatures, a bear bull, and Saint Bernard man. I have already described the ape man, and it was particularly hateful and evil-smelling. Old woman made of vixen and bear, whom I hated from the beginning. She was said to be a passionate votary of the law. Smaller creatures were certain appled youths and little sloth creature, but enough of this catalogue. At first, I had a shivering horror of the brutes, felt all too keenly that they were still brutes, but insensibly I came to a little inhabituated to the idea of them. Moreover, I was affected by Montgomery's attitude towards them. They had been with them so long that they had come to regard them as almost normal human beings. His London days did seem glorious, impossible past to him. Only once a year or so did he go to Arica to deal with Moreau's agent, a trader in animals there. He hardly met the finest type of mankind that in the seafaring village of Spanish mongrels. The men of a broad ship, he had told me, seemed at first just as strange to him as the beast man seemed to me. Unnaturally long in the leg, flat in the face, prominent in the forehead, suspicious, dangerous, and cold-hearted. In fact, he did not like men. His heart had warmed to me, he thought, because he had saved my life. I fancied even then that he had a sneaking kindness for some of these metamorphosized brutes, a vicious sympathy in some of their ways that he had attempted to veil from me at first. Mling, the black-faced man, Montgomery's attendant, and the first beast folk I encountered did not live with the others across the island, but in a small kennel of a black enclosure. The creature was scarcely so intelligent as the ape-man, but far more docile, and the most human-looking of all the beast folk. And Montgomery had trained to prepare it food, and indeed discharge it all the trivial domestic offices that were required. It was a complex trophy of Moreau's horrible skill, a bear tainted with an ox, and one most elaborately made of his all creatures. It treated Montgomery with strange tenderness and devotion. Sometimes he would notice it, pat it, and call it half mocking, half jocular names, and so it made it caper an extraordinary delight. Sometimes he would ill-treat it, especially after it had been at the whiskey, kicking it, beating it, pelting it with stones, or lighted fuses. But whether he treated it well or ill, he loved nothing so much as to be near him. I say I became habituated to the beast people, that 1,000 things which had seemed unnatural and repulsive speedily became natural and ordinary to me. I suppose everything in existence takes its color from average hue of surroundings. Montgomery and Moreau were too peculiar individual and keep my general impressions of humanity well defined. I would see one of clumsy bovine creatures who worked in the launch treading heavily into the undergrowth, and find myself trying to recall how he differed from some really human yokel trudging home from his mechanical labors. Or I would meet the fox-bear woman's vulpine, shifty face, strangely human or in its speculative cunning, and even imagine what had what I had met before in some city byway. Yet every now and then the beast would flash upon me beyond a doubt or denial. An ugly-looking man, hunchback, human savage to all appearance, squatting the aperture of one of the dens, would stretch its arms and yawn, shouting at startling suddenness, scissor-edged indices and sabre-like canines, keen and brilliant knives, and some narrow pathway glancing into transitory daring into eyes of lithe, white female figure I would suddenly see, with a spasmodic revulsion, that she had slit-like pupils, or glancing down at no curving nail at which she had held her shapeless wrap around her. It is a curious thing, by the by, for which I am quite unable to account. These weird creatures, the females, I had earlier days of my day an instinctive sense of their own repulsive clumsiness, and displayed the consequence of far more human regard for the decency and decorum for an extensive costume.